Thank you. Hi, everyone. Some 4 years ago, a puma was seen in broad daylight on the street in the Iguazu National Park. This does not happen frequently, so it hit the headlines. And this is how a major national newspaper framed the episode. Puma stops tourist access to the Iguazu Falls. What a bummer. The Jaguar was then, the Puma was then portrayed as a hassle, as many tourists complained about the incident, while a few others, of course, were very happy with the privilege of this unexpected encounter. But this is just another example of the exceptional power that large carnivores, cats in particular, both wild and domestic, have to divide, to split, and polarize people's opinions and feelings. I bet you might be wondering what the outcome of this was. Well, here it goes. Despite all the anger and fear of some tourists, this story had a happy end for the Puma. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Interactions like this sometimes upset people. And that is behind growing interest in this topic here, human-wildlife conflict. There has been an increasing interest worldwide in human-wildlife conflict, as suggested by this figure. We see that the number of scientific publications addressing human-wildlife conflict starts to grow almost exponentially in the last 20 years or so. You don't have to be familiar with this booming literature to understand, to guess that what we mean by human-wildlife conflict is some kind of problem with wildlife. But humans have always had problems with wild animals. Of all problems people can have with wildlife, this is certainly the most emblematic. What could be worse than being killed, attacked, killed, and devoured by a large predator? Of course, at some point in history, we turned the tables and we became the predators, and now we kill far more lions than the other way around. But even nowadays, a few people in the world are killed by wild animals. A small number of people are killed. I don't want to say a few people, because even one single human life lost to a predator can be a lot when it comes down to public attitude, perceptions of risk related. So a small number, not few. It can be a lot. One can be a lot. It can be too much, too many. In some other moment at some other point in history, when our ancestors left behind a nomadic hunter-gatherer style of way of life and became more settled, they invented the property, the agriculture, the domestication of animals and plants. They invented money and trade, and they said, these crops, these domestic animals on this land are mine, are my property, and they are valuable. But the predators were never told that. And confined, docile domestic animals, easy prey for predator. Plants, even more and more palatable, nutritious, growing in pure stands, free meal for herbivores. humans have always responded to these problems, and this is the way, most obvious way to respond to that: lethal control, which has brought some species to a situation of conservation concern, or perhaps to the extinction. In sum, wild animals have always caused problems to people, either causing the loss of human lives or material loss. But it is only in the last 20, 25 years or so that the term human-wildlife conflict starts to be used and booms. Why is that? Well, what the animals in the human-wildlife conflict literature have in common is not the magnitude of the damage they cause, and it's not their conservation status. Most animals in the human-wildlife conflict literature are large carnivores, wolves, big cats, and large herbivores, such as elephants. What these animals have in common is that, in addition to causing material loss and or causing the loss of human lives, these animals are charismatic. Different from rats and mosquitoes that are considered as pests. Different from whales and sea turtles that almost everyone agree that have to be protected. The real problem, the real conflict is here. To some people, in some contexts, usually the local rural context, these animals are considered as pests and should be exterminated. But to a growing number of people, other groups of people in other contexts, typically the urban, distant context, these animals are now valuable and should be protected. So the real conflict behind the human-wildlife conflict is a conflict of interest, of values between groups of people. To address damage here, we use technical solutions such as repellents, barriers, changes in husbandry practices, interventions based on ecology. But to address this part of the conflict of interest in groups of people, ecology is not enough. It is more challenging. And this would be an even more challenging situation, one in which we have a species here that cause material loss, cause loss of human lives, but cannot be controlled as pests because they're charismatic. We don't have many species, I think, in Latin America that fit this part of the figure. Any guess? Any thoughts about which species we would have here? Right, the jaguar causes material loss, right? Depredation, livestock, and jaguars kill people. Jaguars kill lots of people. How many people have been killed by jaguars in Brazil? How many people are killed a year? Per year by jaguars. Hippos. I think hippos kill 2,000 people a year. Tigers in Bangladesh, they kill some 100 per year. How many people are killed by jaguars? Yeah. 5. Good. That's right. Well, actually, we have documented one case. Okay. Fatal attack. Jaguar. But yeah, but still, as I said, it's a lot. It justifies the persecution, and jaguars would fit there. This is not the official concept of human-wildlife conflict. This is my personal interpretation, my personal way to understand this. There is actually a lack of consensus between conservation and managers about the definition of wildlife conflict. Some people understand human-wildlife conflict as synonym to wildlife damage. Others understand it as something that goes beyond the ecological interactions, encompassing also human reactions expressed in behavior towards wildlife, or even further, reactions towards other people or groups of people who hold different opinions about wildlife damage and wildlife management. There's an ongoing debate about concepts here, about the conceptualization of human-wildlife conflict, but I'm pleased to share with you firsthand this definition that we in the IUCN Task Force on Human-Wildlife Conflicts have just produced. Human-wildlife conflicts, which are typically underpinned by disagreements between people, emerge when the behavior and needs of wildlife are at odds with human goals or ideals, leading to negative impacts on conservation and other human interests. We're so proud of this definition that took us months to went back and forth. So much brainstorm. It's amazing. Definitions can be challenging. Now it's going to be formalized by the IUCN, and our next challenge is to define coexistence. Because if we want to turn conflict into coexistence, we have to have a clear definition of these things. In this field, the coexistence has been seen as the opposite of conflict, as an antonym to conflict. But I understand both conflict and coexistence as having two fundamental components: ecological tangible interactions and human tangible but mostly intangible reactions. So if you want to turn conflict into coexistence, what we want to do ultimately is to improve ecological interactions for the tangible benefits of both people and wildlife, and improve human reactions, which means ultimately to increase the appreciation, the intangible value that people assign to wildlife. So benefit and value would be key concepts here. It is useful to measure, to evaluate these things, and a useful way to do it is to look at the two dimensions of human-wildlife relationships. The situation of wildlife that goes from very poor to very good, sorry for the third time, and the situation of humans going from very poor to very good. If a endangered species causes a tangible damage, a loss to people, and people in turn retaliate, we have the classic human-wildlife conflict. Here, wildlife receives a negative impact from people, but some people are happy doing that, except typically the conservationists. Here, wildlife is doing well, at least at the population level, but some people are bothered, are upset. And this is what we want, both people and wildlife happy. To illustrate what I'm saying, the same species, the jaguar, as a predator of domestic animals, and likely being killed in retaliation. The jaguar as a resource in the illegal trade of its parts, as a nuisance, and as a resource in the ecotourism industry. Of course, the same situation here for wildlife. The same ecological interaction can cause different reactions depending on stakeholders, depending on the people. If you are a rancher raising cattle, an encounter with a jaguar can cause a negative impact on you. You don't want that because you're here. But if you operate a jaguar-based tour, an encounter with the jaguar will be welcome. So there is a variation here, dependent on along this axis, dependent on who you are, dependent on what stakeholder you are. And that is the source of social conflict over wildlife. Well, this part of the figure is conservation problem, right? Wildlife is doing poorly. This part is social problem. People are doing poorly. No wonder why this quadrant here has received growing attention. Far fewer attention has been given to this one here. We don't see many people looking at the factors that determine this positive interactions here. But in doing so, we might be missing something important. And this story is to illustrate what I say. This example comes from Cerro de la Muerte in Costa Rica. This is a small mountain farm. And have a look at this picture and tell me, what do you think is the source of income here for this family farm? In this family farm, for this family. What would be the source of income? Agriculture, right? I think you're not looking carefully enough. Ah! There's a bird there, huh? See the bird? See? Which bird is that? Quetzal. So the quetzal is the source of income for this family. The quetzals are attracted to this tree, this one single tree in the farm. And tourists come to enjoy this spectacular view with binoculars, with a telescope. This family makes $14,000 a year with this single tree in the avocado family. Offering this complete quetzal experience. This family is a member of the Familias Pro Quetzal project. And what is particularly interesting about this project, it was not created by any conservation NGO or governmental institution. It was a local initiative by a local lodge that started engaging family by family, and now 9 years later has 23 families involved. This man here is the owner of that farm that makes $14,000 a year. He used to be a poacher. He's not anymore. And those 23 families, they used to cut down trees because they don't want to shade on their crops. Now they are growing trees, and to attract quetzals. Quetzal or gold chicken. And in doing so, they are improving habitat to other species. So this project is not only changing individual behaviors towards wildlife, it is changing the entire ecosystem. There's no conservation problem here. There is no human-wildlife conflict. Everybody's happy. But we must learn from these successful stories. So we are in collaboration with the Costa Rica Wildlife Foundation, looking at the factors behind this. We probably use the diffusion of innovation theory to learn how it became this success, and assess the project. This model can be scalable, replicable. Well, this is the scale of analysis in the human dimensions literature when it comes down to human-wildlife conflicts. How to explain specific behaviors towards wildlife from intrapersonal factors. This is an example of how we do it. In this study, we examined the factors that determine ranchers' intention to kill jaguars in Amazonia and Pantanal. And we found that social factors such as subjective social norm, descriptive social norm, social identity, group identity are important factors. This approach is useful for us to identify where to concentrate our interventions, where it is more cost effective to focus our efforts. So we not here or maybe here. So if you want to change the behavior of killing jaguars by changing the intention to kill jaguars, which determinant factors here we should concentrate on. For example, if research reveals that people do not know enough to understand the problem, then we provide information. For example, there are cases where people don't know how to prevent wildlife damage. Then a simple guideline, a simple manual like this may be useful. In other cases, people have a distorted perception of risk, and then the right risk communication might be more sense. Like in this case, putting the impact of jaguars on livestock and on people's safety into perspective. But it's a common pitfall in human behavior change to assume that the more people know, the better people will act. So all we have to do is to educate. Let's provide them with information. They know enough, they will do the right thing. That's not always the case. There might be cases where research will reveal that people know enough about it. They know everything they need to know about it, but they don't care. And you're not going to waste your resource with some information oriented campaign. You better find some more creative alternative to change behavior, like changing incentives, feeling social norms. And that's what persuasive communication, social marketing, conservation marketing are about. And in this experiment, we carried out this experiment to assess the effectiveness of school-based approaches to improve attitude, to improve perceptions of jaguars among children and their parents on the Amazon deforestation frontier. The children at rural schools were exposed to lectures and group discussions. Those activities were based on tailor-made activity books, and after each lecture, parts of this book were assigned as homework, and the parents were asked to sign their children's homework. Each family, each father received a copy of this book, and children and parents were evaluated before and after the intervention. And these are the results, the impacts of these interventions on these factors that were found to be determinants of jaguar killing in that region. I'm not going to go through all the details here. I just want to call your attention to this. The adults who received the book from their children, from their kids, they were more, the effect was greater on those adults who received the book from their children than for adults who received the book directly from conservation, representing a local conservation field. And this suggests that those adults were influenced not only by the information explicitly conveyed in the content of the book, but also by the implicit message that their children, the local school, and therefore probably all their community members support jaguar conservation. So that's social norm. That's a way of changing social norm. This perception that everybody's doing, I should do it too. We are, we do what most people do. right? And that's the basis for behavior change through social marketing. This is another experiment. This comes from Bolivia. It's the work that Nuno Negroes has been doing, carrying out these workshops where community members produce a set of recommendations of best practices, rules to share the space with Jaguars. The conservationist facilitates the process, but the rules are generated by the community. And at the end of the workshop, they take this picture and make this public commitment that they will comply with the rules that they themselves propose. Then all these rules and pictures on a poster are exposed in some visible place, some public place, community center, schools, and in this way, this message is received as generated within the community and disseminated laterally or horizontally instead of imposed from outside, from top-down way, from some conservation effects. And that expected to be more effective. What he's doing in Bolivia is something that we started to test in southern Amazonia, and now I am again doing this in the Atlantic forest. Maybe people care but have no alternatives. Then what you have to do is to find alternatives. Maybe people have alternatives but lack necessary skills. Then you offer training. Maybe they have the skills but face external barriers, such as lack of financial resources. Then you have to try to remove the barriers. This is not a protocol. This is not, it doesn't have to follow this sequence. This is just to illustrate the importance of research, the importance of evidence, instead of intuition in the design of behavior change strategies. And don't be misled by this figure to believe that it's easy to change behavior. It can be really difficult sometimes, and I'm going to give you an example. Some time ago, in my position as the executive coordinator of the National Action Plan for the Conservation of Big Cats, I was sent by the Brazilian Agency for Environmental Indigenous Affairs, FUNAI, together with the general coordinator of the plan, Rogério de Paula, to investigate the case of 2 supposed fatal attacks by jaguars on humans in this indigenous territory. So we flew to the heart of Xingu Indigenous Park, to the Kamaura tribe. It was absolutely amazing. It's some places, the closest I've been to Eden. It's really incredible. And we were there. We thought we were there to play some CSI, but we hardly found any evidence. Just all we did was to interview. And it was a very unusual case. As I said, we have only one officially documented case of fatal attack in jaguar. And then we have these 2 cases, 2 attacks, separated by 1 month and a few kilometers. A man and a woman, different tribes. Very strange. But after interviewing community members, we found that there was a consensus that those 2 people had been killed by a jaguar, but not a real jaguar. They were killed by the so-called Cape jaguar, which is the sorcerer, the local sorcerer. Sorcerer? Do you understand that word? Yeah. Who wears a cape, jaguar cape, and turns into a jaguar to kill people in the night for whatever reason. People usually don't know who the local sorcerer is, but his identity can be revealed. All you have to do is to take a strand of hair of the victim to the shaman. The shaman is the good wizard. The people trust the shaman. So the shaman will boil this strand of hair, and then the first person in the community to get sick, that's the sorcerer. When we were there, the sorcerer had been already identified, and the family of the victims had sworn to kill. It hasn't happened, but if it happens, then for each person supposedly killed by a jaguar in this part of Brazil, some innocent will be murdered as a consequence. Well, we deployed camera traps and we captured several jaguars walking around the tribe. We don't know if this is a real jaguar or a fake jaguar. But it is very difficult to change behavior in this situation. It's very difficult to prevent people from killing jaguars in this country, right? And it's quite important to look at what's going on within indigenous territories, because they account for a significant part of the Brazilian territory, especially in the Amazon. Very little research has been conducted inside these areas. Well, it don't have to be within, it's not only within indigenous territories that this fantastic dimension of human-wildlife interactions can play an important role. This is another interesting example, fascinating example. The intentional killing of giant anteaters by truck drivers in central Brazil. There is a belief in that region that giant anteaters bring bad luck. And to break the spell, you have to, if it crosses your path, it will bring you bad luck. And the way to break the spell is by killing the animal. And for truck drivers, it's not only bad luck, it's not any bad luck. If a giant anteater crosses the path of a truck driver while he's driving, he will find out when he gets home that he has been cheated by his wife. So that's a quite strong motivation to speed up and get off the road and kill the giant. So this is again another challenging context, challenging situation to think about behavior change. This is another level of analysis in the dimensions of human-wildlife conflict, the level of interpersonal factors. And one of the goals here is to mitigate conflict. There are different levels of conflict. The level of dispute is simply about losses, tangible losses. It's more complicated when you have underlying conflict groups of people, which is when, in addition to losses, there is a history of resentment. It's not only about that local loss at that very moment, but that there is a history of problems, and that affects the way people interpret that particular event of loss. In the Atlantic forest, for example, we found that resentments towards park authority affects people's tolerance to big cats, and it's quite common. This bad relationship between park authorities and around the parks. So if we really want to protect big cats in the Atlantic forest, protected areas should be concerned about being effective in protection, but also in improving their relationship with community. Because these big cats will eventually go outside the protected areas. And then we have deep-rooted conflict, which is when, in addition to losses and a history of resentments, we have social identity and values threatened. It is important to know where your conflict is, because each level will require a different solution. We have just practical solutions, technical solutions for dispute. If you have underlying conflict, we need to improve relationships. If you have deep-rooted conflict, you have to reconciliate values and identities. These are the two levels of analysis that have received attention. But there might be situations where factors at higher hierarchical levels play a role. Factors like institutions, market, and policies. This level here has received far less attention. This is the next frontier in conflict. In the Caatinga, for example, this is a biome in Brazil where we find the highest rates of socioeconomic vulnerability. A regional policy to pay a something called rural retirement or rural pensions, some kind of assistance, financial assistance to these families in vulnerability. That policy that was completely focused on social, human well-being, had an unexpected positive impact on the environment, because that little increase in income resulted in people switching the use of wood as fuel. And this wood they take from the forest and call it behind deforestation. They switched from wood to gas as a fuel. And their source of, and they switched the source of protein from bushmeat to chicken. So those are two major environmental problems there, deforestation and pressure. And this policy that had nothing to do with the environment had this positive impact on the environment. So by looking at this state, at this scale, we might be able to identify, but when we look at this from a top-down and bottom-up perspective, different angles, we might be able to identify where along this gradient we should concentrate our efforts for more cost-effective impacts. And we should also look at the landscape at the proper scale as we upscale the hierarchical levels here. We also upscale the spatial at the scale of analysis. And in human-wildlife conflict, we've been putting a lot of effort on fixing the problem, changing human behavior, resolving human social conflict. But sometimes it's not cost effective to fix the problem, to resolve. By looking at this at the level of the landscape, we might, for example, realize that it's not worth trying to change the situation, to try to change people's behavior here. If you want to improve the human-wildlife relationship, we better promote coexistence in this corridor here than trying to fix a problem here that will never be fixed. Actually, people will never change their behavior. They will never resolve their conflicts. All right. So that's something that we can do when we look at larger spatial scales. So we've been trying to explore the notion of corridors of tolerance in addition to ecological corridors. Can we, by looking at spatial variation in tolerance, can we identify where we should prioritize, put more effort in addition to the well-known approach of identifying ecological corridors? It is within this framework of looking at a broader scale and planning This is planning. It's all about planning, right? And in this book chapter, in the book we are publishing here, we argue that might be better for everyone if we plan not for coexistence, because here we're talking about more and more about abundance, problems with abundant species, exotic species, and because human-wildlife conflicts fundamentally is ultimately about disagreements and resentments between people. Planning for coexistence rather than conservation planning would be a more inclusive and productive approach. And it is within this framework that we are starting the People and Wildlife Coexistence Project under the WildCRU WildCRU partnership in collaboration with the University of Sao Paulo. We will be exploring ways to upscale the analysis and management of human-wildlife conflict in order to promote coexistence, taking advantage of a set of project partners in a wide cross-section of ecological, cultural, socio-economic, and political context in Latin America, with focus on the following species: jaguars, pumas, maned wolf, tapir, black and chestnut eagle, the giant anteater, and guanaco. These are the institutions involved in these different projects, partner projects. By looking at these multiple sides, this project will be able to address questions about patterns and processes at larger scales that each project individually cannot address. And also by this project is linking these project partner projects together, creating a network for them to learn from each other, and in turn assist them in delivering best practice informed human-wildlife conflict mitigation. I am based at the Wildlife Ecology Management and Conservation Lab at the University of Sao Paulo. We are a group of over 20 people. Most of them are graduate students working on ecological research. One of the led by Professor Katia Ferraz. One of the areas of expertise of our lab is ecological modeling. And we are focusing our effort on the Atlantic forest, in particular in the state of Sao Paulo, where we are ahead of the most extensive wildlife monitoring program with over 60,000 hours of sampling. So our lab is in a privileged position to explore ways of integrating social and ecological data in this framework of planning for coexistence. We don't know exactly how to do it, but that's what we are planning to do in the next 3 years. This project is will liaise with and build upon the approach developed by the IUCN Task Force on Human-Wildlife Conflict, whose activities, by the way, include the compilation of this resource library and the production of guidelines institute, and with the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, the CPSG. CPSG is famous for the development of modeling tools such as Vortex, and also famous for the development of workshop processes and capacity building in human dimensions, in planning and facilitation is one of the components of this project. Capacity building will be designed accordingly based on the research in order to fill these gaps, because this is capacity building in human dimension and strategic planning is currently a gap in conservation in Latin America. So the idea is to identify where we can focus capacity building in a more cost-effective. So this project is starting now. It officially started in December last year, and it will be supported by just 30 years. Did I say 30 years? 3 years, sorry. So we have 3 exciting years ahead. And this is how we expect to contribute to this paradigm shift towards a more promising approach to coexistence in its broadest sense. Coexistence between individuals, human and non-human, between species, between social groups, institutions. And this is my last picture here. I just got this picture 2 days ago from Esteban Brenes Mora, who's a head of NAI Conservation in Costa Rica. This girl is from a poor family there. Most of her family members are poachers, and her family cannot afford to buy binoculars. She's different. She's from the new generation, and I think the poetic side of this, the poetic description of this is that she pretends she's holding binoculars to enjoy the view of this tapir, her property. But what she's actually holding is the hope of a world where people and wildlife can coexist. Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you, Patricia, for the opportunity. Just by chance, I've been here what I hadn't seen for so long. I'm not going to say which geological year we saw it for the last time. And I'm talking about Betty Wazelle, Simone, Patricia, Emilio, and Carol. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.